The watches are still there, sitting under perfect lighting that costs more than most people earn in a month, each piece positioned with the kind of precision that's supposed to make your heart beat faster. But something fundamental has shifted, something you feel before you can explain it. Walk past any authorized dealer right now, and you'll sense it, that strange absence where energy used to be. The same glass cases, the same security guards standing near the door, the same elegant furniture arranged to make you feel like you're entering somewhere important. But the atmosphere has changed, gone flat and strange, like a party after everyone interesting has already left. This is a luxury empire worth billions, built on waiting lists and artificial scarcity, and the belief that some objects are simply beyond your reach. For years, it worked perfectly. Demand crushing supply, customers begging just for the chance to be considered. Now, February 2026 has exposed something unsettling. Not with headlines, not with announcements, but with silence. What happens when the most powerful watch brand in the world cannot sell its own myth anymore? And why does it feel like this is only the beginning? The dream is leaking out, slow and quiet, and nobody wants to be the first one to say it out loud. You walk past the window and something feels off, even if you can't name it right away. The lights are still perfect, the display is still gleaming, everything arranged like a museum exhibit behind thick glass. But there's a heaviness now, a stillness that doesn't belong in a place selling things people once killed time on waiting lists to buy. Inside, the sales staff stand in their tailored suits, hands clasped, eyes watching the door with a focus that borders on desperation. They smile when you enter, but the smile arrives too fast, stretches too wide, holds too long. It's the smile of someone who hasn't spoken to a serious customer in days, maybe weeks. You can feel them wanting you to ask about something, anything, just to break the silence that's been sitting in this room like fog. The watches themselves are flawless, arranged in perfect rows under spotless glass. Each one positioned at the exact angle, meant to catch light and trigger want. But the want isn't there anymore, not in the air, not in the people who wander in out of curiosity and wander out just as quickly. These rooms were built to make you feel small and unworthy, to make you beg for the privilege of spending $50,000 on a piece of steel and sapphire. Now they just feel cold, like luxury spaces trying too hard to convince you they still matter. There are no crowds anymore, no nervous first-time buyers being gently turned away, no quiet negotiations happening in back rooms. Just empty chairs, polished floors that echo when you walk, and staff who check their phones more than they used to. The energy that once filled these places, that crackling tension between scarcity and desire, has drained away and left something hollow behind. You notice things you wouldn't have before. Small cracks in the performance. A case that's been rearranged but still shows the same watches from last month. A brochure stack that hasn't moved. A calendar on the desk with too many blank spaces where appointments should be. This isn't a showroom anymore, not really. It's a waiting room. And nobody knows what they're waiting for, or if anyone's coming. The waiting lists that stopped moving. There are names still sitting in databases, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. People who walked into showrooms 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and put themselves down for a Daytona, or a Submariner, or whatever model the dealer told them was impossible to get. They smiled politely, shook hands, said they understood it might take time. They checked their email every week, then every month, refreshing their phones like addicts, waiting for a message that would change their lives. The calls never came, and for a long time that made sense. That was part of the game. Scarcity meant waiting, waiting meant value. Value meant the watch would feel earned when it finally arrived. Except now the watches are there, sitting in cases, available, and the calls still aren't happening. Not because there's nothing to sell, but because the dealers know something they didn't know before, something that's slowly curdling in their stomachs every time they look at that list. The people who begged don't want them anymore. Some dealers still go through the motions, sending polite texts about pieces that just became available, using the same careful language that used to make people drop everything and rush to the store. But the urgency is gone, replaced by a quiet dread that settles in when hours pass and the phone doesn't buzz back. These lists were supposed to be gold mines, proof of endless demand. Now they're just documents full of people who've moved on, who've stopped caring, who've realized that wanting something for years can eventually turn into not wanting it at all. The scarcity broke, but only behind closed doors, only in ways the public isn't supposed to see yet. And while the lists gather dust and the messages go unanswered, something else is happening in the shadows, something the dealers aren't allowed to talk about, but can't afford to ignore much longer. The prices are starting to move, and not in the direction anyone planned. Prices falling in the dark. The numbers on the website haven't changed. The official retail prices still sitting there like monuments that nobody's allowed to touch. Walk into an authorized dealer and ask what a Submariner costs, and they'll tell you the same figure they've been saying for months. Their voice steady, professional, like they're reading from a script that hasn't been updated, because updating it would mean admitting something nobody wants to admit. But stay in that showroom long enough. Show even the smallest hint of actual interest, and you'll notice the energy shift. The salesperson leans in slightly. Their voice drops half a tone. And suddenly, there's flexibility where there was never flexibility before. Maybe there's a watch that's been tried on, technically pre-owned but barely touched. Maybe there's a model they can move without the usual weight. Maybe the conversation turns toward what you're really willing to spend today, right now, if the deal feels right. These aren't advertised discounts. There are no signs in windows announcing sales, no emails blasted to customer lists. This is happening in whispers, in private rooms, in conversations that both sides understand will never be repeated. A few hundred off here, a package deal there, a sudden willingness to negotiate on pieces that 6 months ago would have had people fighting for the privilege of paying full price. The fall is real but invisible, hidden behind the same confident storefronts and the same polished smiles. Gray market dealers are watching their inventory lose value in real time. Watches they bought at premium prices, now sitting in safes while buyers scroll past them, looking for better deals. The phones that used to ring constantly with desperate collectors now stay quiet for days, and when they do ring, it's lowball offers from people who can smell blood in the water. They're dropping prices too, slower than they want to admit, testing numbers in private chats and encrypted messages, trying to find the floor before they hit it face first. Nobody knows where the bottom is, because nobody wants to be the first one to find out. So the prices keep sliding in the dark, quiet and relentless, while everyone pretends the sun is still shining. And if you're wondering why now, why February 2026 became the month where everything finally cracked open, the answer is simpler and uglier than anyone wants to believe. February 2026 was not an accident. This wasn't a sudden storm that appeared out of nowhere. This was years of pressure, building in a system that everyone knew was fragile, but nobody wanted to fix, because fixing it meant admitting it was broken. February just happened to be the month where all the cracks met in the same place at the same time, where the math stopped working and the illusion couldn't hold itself together anymore. The inventory had been growing for months, quietly stacking up in back rooms and safes and authorized dealer stock rooms that were supposed to stay perpetually empty. But the demand wasn't eternal. It was already cooling, already shifting, and every new shipment just added weight to a structure that was starting to buckle. At the same time, the customers who'd been priced out, or waitlisted out, or simply exhausted by the whole performance, started realizing they didn't actually need a Rolex to feel successful. They bought other brands, they bought art, they bought experiences. They stopped checking their email for calls that never came. The desperation faded and left behind something worse than anger. It left behind indifference, the kind that doesn't argue or complain. It just quietly walks away and doesn't come back. February was also tax season approaching, Chinese New Year spending already done, credit card bills from the holidays still arriving, economic uncertainty sitting heavy in conversations everywhere. People with money were being careful with money, and people without money had already stopped pretending months ago. The timing was brutal, a perfect convergence of too much product meeting too little desire at exactly the wrong moment. And then there was something else. Something harder to measure but impossible to ignore once you noticed it. The watches had been everywhere for too long, on too many wrists, in too many Instagram posts, worn by too many people who clearly didn't appreciate them the way the true collectors thought they should. Ubiquity kills luxury faster than anything else, and Rolex had become ubiquitous without realizing the danger until it was already happening. And the people who were supposed to want these watches most, the ones with actual wealth and taste and options, were the first ones to notice something had changed. They started walking past the showrooms without even slowing down. When wealthy buyers lose interest, the truly rich were never the ones camping outside stores or refreshing websites at midnight, or building relationships with sales staff over years of small talk and strategic gift-giving. They had access, the kind that comes from spending enough money in enough places that doors just open without asking. When they wanted a Rolex, they got a Rolex. Simple as that. No games, no waiting, no performance required. But something shifted in that world too. Something quiet and devastating that dealers are only now starting to understand. The wealthy customers are still walking into boutiques, still browsing, still asking questions with that casual tone that comes from never worrying about price. But they're not buying, not the way they used to, not with that easy confidence that made luxury retail actually work. They pick up watches, turn them over in their hands, put them back down with a polite smile that doesn't reach their eyes. You can see it in the subtle choices they're making. The Patek Philippe on their wrist instead of the Daytona they would have worn 2 years ago. The Richard Mille or the Vacheron Constantin, or sometimes just a vintage piece from an estate sale that nobody else has. They're not avoiding Rolex out of anger or spite. They're avoiding it because it stopped being interesting, stopped being special, stopped making them feel like they owned something that separated them from everyone else. Status symbols only work when they're actually selective. When wearing one means you're part of a club that most people can't access. But when your lawyer has the same watch, and your accountant has the same watch, and the guy who sold you a car has the same watch, and you've seen it on 40 different wrists at 40 different dinners, it stops being a symbol and starts being a uniform. Rich people don't want uniforms. They want distinction. They want pieces that make other rich people quietly jealous. The conversations have changed too, the ones happening at private clubs and charity galas and yacht parties where actual money moves around. Rolex used to come up naturally, a safe topic everyone could appreciate. Now it gets mentioned, and there's a pause, a subtle shift in energy. Like bringing up something that used to be cool but isn't anymore, and everyone knows it, but nobody wants to be rude. The silence says more than any criticism could. These are the customers who could absorb price increases without blinking, who never cared about waiting lists because they never had to wait, who bought multiple pieces a year just because they felt like it. And they're drifting away, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly redirecting their attention and their money toward brands that still feel exclusive, that still carry weight in the rooms where opinions actually matter. When the wealthy stop caring, the aspiring notice, and when the aspiring notice, the foundation cracks. And for the authorized dealers stuck in the middle, watching their best customers politely decline and walk out empty-handed, there's nowhere to hide and nobody to blame. They're locked into a system they can't control, bound by rules they didn't write, trapped by the very crown they once wore proudly, trapped by the crown. The contracts authorized dealers sign with Rolex aren't suggestions, they're commandments, carved in legal language that makes it very clear who holds the power and who exists to serve. You sell at the prices Rolex sets. You display the watches the way Rolex wants. You follow the rules exactly, or you lose the authorization that keeps your business alive. And the market has shifted. Violently. But the contracts haven't changed at all. Dealers are sitting on inventory. They can't move. Watching customers walk past watches that would have sold in hours just months ago, feeling the weight of every piece, gathering dust in cases that were supposed to stay empty. They know what would help. What would bring people back through the doors, what would clear the stock and restore some cash flow and buy them time to figure out what comes next. Lower the prices, offer deals. Create urgency through actual value instead of artificial scarcity. But they can't, not officially. Not in any way that Rolex would notice or approve. The brand protects its pricing structure like a religion, and breaking that religion means excommunication, means losing the authorization, means watching your entire business model collapse because nobody comes to your store for anything except the Rolex you're no longer allowed to sell. So they smile through gritted teeth, maintain the facade, and try to find tiny cracks in the system where they can whisper deals without getting caught. The mental toll is starting to show in ways that don't make it into sales reports or quarterly meetings. Store managers who used to radiate confidence now look tired, worn down by the gap between what corporate demands and what reality allows. Sales staff who spent years perfecting their pitch now deliver it with a flatness that everyone can hear, going through motions that feel increasingly pointless when the customers aren't responding anymore. Some dealers are quietly furious, venting in private conversations with other dealers who are living the same nightmare, sharing stories of corporate communications that feel completely disconnected from what's actually happening on showroom floors. They're told to maintain standards, to trust the brand, to remember that Rolex has survived worse and always comes back stronger. But none of that pays the rent or covers payroll or explains to staff why their commissions have disappeared. Others are just scared, running the numbers in their heads at 3 a.m, calculating how long they can survive if sales stay this slow, wondering if they should have diversified years ago when they had the chance, back when Rolex felt like a guaranteed revenue stream instead of a gilded cage. They're stuck between the brand that won't bend and the market that already has. Crushed in a vice that tightens every month, the situation doesn't improve. And through it all, Rolex stays silent, offering no guidance, no acknowledgement, no hint that they even see what's happening in the stores that carry their name. The dealers keep smiling because smiling is required. Keep pretending because pretending is all they have left. But outside those showrooms, in the digital spaces where perception gets built and destroyed in real time, something else was happening. Something that killed the mystique faster than any economic downturn ever could. The dream didn't die from lack of access. It died from too much exposure. Social media killed the dream. There was a time when seeing a Rolex meant something, when you'd notice it across a room and wonder about the person wearing it, what they did, how they got there, what kind of life put that particular piece on their wrist. The scarcity wasn't just about availability, it was about visibility. You simply didn't see them everywhere because not everyone had one, and the people who did weren't constantly shoving it in your face. Then Instagram happened, then TikTok, then every platform that turns private moments into public performance, and suddenly every wrist in every photo became a billboard. Watch collectors posting entire collections spread across beds like trophies, influencers angling their hands to catch light on their Submariner, businessmen filming motivational content with their Daytona prominently displayed. Even people who clearly couldn't afford them finding ways to rent or borrow or finance their way into posts that screamed success louder than their bank accounts could support. The algorithm loved it because engagement loved it, and for a while, it worked exactly how everyone hoped. Rolex became more desirable because it was more visible. The posts fed the hunger fed the waiting lists fed the mystique. But there's a tipping point nobody saw coming, where ubiquity crosses from aspirational into exhausting, where seeing something everywhere doesn't make you want it more, it makes you numb to it. You can't scroll for 5 minutes without seeing another wrist shot, another unboxing, another humble brag disguised as gratitude. The watch that was supposed to whisper now screams from every corner of your feed, and screaming isn't elegant, it isn't exclusive. It isn't the quiet confidence that luxury is supposed to embody. It's just noise, desperate and constant and fundamentally unimpressive once you've seen it 10,000 times. Younger buyers especially have started associating Rolex not with achievement, but with trying too hard, with a specific kind of status anxiety that feels outdated and slightly embarrassing. They see their father's watches, their boss's watches, the watches worn by people trying to prove something nobody asked them to prove. They turn toward brands that haven't been hollowed out by overexposure, toward pieces that still carry mystery because they're not performing on social media every single day. The irony is brutal. The same tools that amplified desire are now suffocating it. You can't make something rare again once everyone's already seen it everywhere. You can't rebuild mystique after you've watched it dissolve across a million identical posts. Mystery dies when everything is photographed. And without mystery, luxury becomes just another commodity. But at least the people posting on Instagram actually wanted the watches. There's another group who had different plans, who saw Rolex not as something to wear, but as something to flip, And their rooms full of unsold inventory tell a darker story. Gray market rooms full of regret. The gray market dealers thought they had it figured out. The formula seemed simple enough that it felt like printing money. Buy Rolex watches at retail or slightly above. Hold them for a few weeks or months while demand kept climbing. Then sell them for double, triple, sometimes more to customers who couldn't wait and didn't mind paying premium prices. The math worked beautifully for years. Every watch moved. Every investment paid off. The only regret was not buying more. So they bought more, took out loans, maxed credit lines, converted every available dollar into steel and gold, filling safes with inventory that was supposed to be guaranteed returns. They built entire businesses around it, quit their jobs, rented warehouses, hired staff, created websites documenting their success. This wasn't gambling. This was smart money, recognizing an obvious opportunity, riding a wave that showed no signs of stopping. The safes are still full, but the phones have gone quiet in a way that feels almost violent. The customers who used to message at all hours, desperate and willing to pay whatever it took, have vanished into the same silence haunting authorized dealers. They try posting watches with prices that would have sold instantly 6 months ago, and the posts just sit there, gathering likes but no actual inquiries, just window shoppers who want to negotiate down to numbers that would mean taking losses. Some are still in denial, convinced this is temporary, that demand will come roaring back any day. They hold prices firm, refusing to accept the watches are worth less than what they paid, less than what they borrowed, less than the monthly interest accumulating. They wait for a rebound that keeps not coming, watching savings drain while watches collect dust, perfect and worthless. Others have started panicking, dropping prices in private messages, offering deals they would have laughed at a year ago, trying to move anything just to generate cash flow and stop the bleeding. But even at reduced prices, buyers aren't coming, because anyone who wants a Rolex can get one from an authorized dealer now without the markup, without the risk. The inventory that was supposed to be liquid turns out to be concrete, heavy, and immovable, anchoring them to decisions they can't undo. There are gray market dealers who are going to lose everything. People who built their entire financial lives on the assumption that Rolex would always go up, that they'd found the perfect bet where downside didn't exist. They sit in rooms surrounded by hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of watches nobody wants, calculating how much longer they can hold on. And while they panic and inventory piles up, there's one entity that could change everything with a single statement, one brand that holds all the power. But Rolex has chosen silence instead. Rolex refuses to blink. There have been no press releases, no statements to authorized dealers beyond the usual corporate communications about standards and expectations, no acknowledgement that anything has changed at all in the market that bears their name. Rolex continues operating exactly as it always has, shipping watches on schedule, maintaining price structures, enforcing the same rules with the same rigid precision that's defined the brand for decades. The silence is deliberate, calculated in a way that's either masterful strategy or complete denial. And from the outside, it's impossible to tell which. Maybe they see something the rest of the market doesn't. Maybe they're playing a longer game that requires holding the line, even when everything around them is shifting. Or maybe they genuinely don't see the problem, insulated by layers of corporate structure and historical success. Convinced that Rolex is too big and too established to be touched by something as mundane as changing consumer preferences. Dealers keep asking for guidance, for any signal about how to handle the slowdown, whether prices might adjust, whether production might slow, whether there's a plan beyond pretending nothing is wrong. The answers they get back are variations of stay the course, maintain standards, trust the brand. It's the kind of response that works when you're weathering a temporary storm, but feels increasingly hollow when the storm shows no signs of passing and your store is flooding. Some people interpret the silence as confidence, as Rolex knowing something everyone else is panicking about prematurely, as the brand refusing to make reactive decisions based on short-term fluctuations. Others see it as arrogance, as a company so used to dominance that it can't imagine a world where the rules have actually changed, where their name alone isn't enough to generate the desire it used to. Either way, the silence continues, heavy and absolute, while the market keeps deteriorating and the questions keep getting louder and more desperate. Rolex isn't blinking, but that doesn't mean they're winning. It just means nobody knows what they're thinking while everything burns. And beneath all the noise, beneath the failing dealers and the trapped speculators and the quiet retreat of wealthy buyers, there's one question that nobody in the industry wants to say out loud. One thought that feels almost blasphemous to even consider. The quiet question no one will say out loud. What if this isn't temporary? What if Rolex isn't coming back from this the way it always has before? What if something fundamental has broken in the relationship between the brand and the people who used to want it desperately enough to wait years and pay anything? What if the crown that seemed permanent is actually just heavy, outdated, a symbol from a different era that doesn't translate to whatever comes next? Nobody wants to be the first person to say it, because saying it feels like manifesting it into reality, like admitting you were wrong about something you built your entire understanding of luxury around. Rolex was supposed to be the safe choice, the forever investment, the watch that would always hold value because it always had held value, because the waiting lists proved demand was eternal, and the resale market proved the math was sound. But all of that was built on belief, on collective agreement that these particular objects mattered more than similar objects from other brands, and belief is fragile in ways that nobody wants to acknowledge until it's already cracking. When enough people stop believing at the same time, when the cultural narrative shifts and the status symbol becomes a joke or an embarrassment or just irrelevant, there's no amount of craftsmanship or heritage or marketing that can force the belief back into existence. The luxury market has seen it happen before. Brands that seemed untouchable, slowly fading into irrelevance, not because the products got worse, but because the desire moved somewhere else and never came back. Rolex always seemed immune to that fate. Too big, too established, too deeply woven into the cultural understanding of success. But immunity isn't the same as invincibility, and February 2026 might be remembered as the month when everyone realized the difference. The showrooms are still there, the watches are still perfect, the brand still carries weight. But the energy is gone. And energy is what made all of this work in the first place. What turned metal and marketing into objects people dreamed about for years. Without it, you're left with expensive watches in empty rooms, beautiful and cold, and waiting for a desire that might never return. And that's the question hanging in the air, unspoken but felt everywhere. What happens when luxury stops feeling safe?